Here we go with Unit 3, Day 7 notes. We're going to do a little recap in the beginning, but eventually we will be getting to the topic of factor by grouping. So we still are factoring. We're just learning a different method today. So in the very beginning, we learned GCF. So that's kind of an introduction, a way to factor. So let me just throw some examples at you here. I'm going to do these in red pen. So example number 1, if I gave you 2x squared minus 5x. Remember, GCF is a number or a variable. In this problem, I noticed that no number can come out, but I noticed I could take an x out. So I pull the x to the outside. That leaves me with 2x left over, and then a minus 5 left over. And that's how we did GCF. There's just one random example. Okay, after that, or kind of that same section, we did difference of squares. So let's call this example 2. If you have a problem that looks something like this, x squared minus 81. Remember, you wanted to make sure that it was a binomial. It had two terms. It had to have a minus sign on the inside, and then the numbers had to be perfect squares. So the square root of 1 is 1. That works. And then the square root of 81 is 9. That also works. So then you break it into your two sets of parentheses. Those are your factors. You separate x squared into x, and then you put your 9 in there. 9 and 9. They look the same so far. One of them needs to have a positive, one of them needs to have a negative, and that would be factored completely. Let me just throw a different one at you for this one. Example 3. Let's see. Something like 4x squared minus 36. It is a binomial, so that's good. It has a minus sign. That's also good. Let's check perfect squares. Square root of 4 is 2. That's good. That works. Square root of 36 is 6. Okay, that also works. So let's separate this into my factors. Okay, this is where you need to be careful. You need to separate 4x squared. Well, 4 as a perfect square is 2 times 2. So I'll separate that, and then they get the x's next to it. And then 36 as a perfect square separates into 6 and 6. See how they're exactly the same? However, one of them is going to get a plus and one of them is going to get a minus. And that's how you would factor that. And then we spent a couple days factoring trinomials. So let me maybe throw one or two examples here. Example 4, something that we did towards the beginning, is if we have x squared minus 14x minus 15. So this again is a trinomial. It has 3 pieces. That's the 3 pieces. Just to kind of point a couple things out to you, this number in the front is technically a 1, which means that this is a little bit easier of a problem. So how we did this is we said what multiplies to 15 and adds to 14. So 15 times 1 and 5 times 3. That's my only two numbers that multiply to 15. So then you have to decide, should you use the 15 and the 1 or should you use the 5 and 3? I'm going to use a negative 15 and a positive 1 to get me the negative 14 that I want. There's my combo. So when I write this as my factors, I need to separate x squared into x and x. One of these needs to be a negative 15 and one of these needs to be a positive 15. And that's how you would have your answer. I guess while I'm on this one, this is how you would check your work. To check your work, you would need to FOIL. So you would do x times x is x squared. X times 1 is 1x. Negative 15 times x is negative 15x. Negative 15 times 1 is negative 15. You can combine like terms in the middle there. So you have x squared minus 14x minus 15. And if you look at where you started in the very beginning to this problem that I just wrote out, they're exactly the same, which means you factored it correctly. So there's just a quick little recap on how you would check your work. So this orange part is not mandatory, but it's a great way to check that you did the problem correctly. Okay, so here's the new stuff for today. Goals factor by grouping. This is kind of one of my favorite ways. It just kind of works out to be super cool. Factor each polynomial completely. So if you have factor by grouping, you're going to have 4 different pieces. So you have 4 terms, 1 in the beginning, 2 in the middle, and 1 at the end. So if you have 4 terms, you need to factor by grouping. So I'm going to go ahead and group this into my yellow and my blue. So see how I grouped the first 2 together? and I grouped the second 2 together. What I'm going to do, and you have to kind of stay with me here, is I am going to take a GCF out of my yellow piece. So if I take a GCF out of my yellow piece, that's going to be an X. Actually, that's going to be an X squared. That's going to leave me with X minus 1 on the inside. That was just the yellow part. So I'm going to highlight this yellow because yellow goes with yellow. Then I'm going to do the other part, skip to the blue part. So now I'm going to focus on the blue part. What can I take out? What is my GCF of the blue part? Well, this is kind of weird, but the only thing I could take out of this blue part would be a 1. So that's going to leave me with X minus 1. Again, that's the blue. So I did the yellow and I did the blue. Okay, what you need to notice is that, see the parts in parentheses? I'm underlining them green. Those have to match. See how they both have X minus 1? That has to happen. If you did it correctly, those will match. So from here, you need to take these terms that I just did a little bracket on. You need to take those and you need to drop them down and you write them as a factor together. And then the green underline piece that matches, you drop it down 1 time. And this is your factored form. This method of doing the yellow and the blue and doing all of that helps you factor by grouping. You group the pieces, helps you to get your answer. So let's do the next one. I'll do the yellow and the blue again. I have 4 pieces. I grouped the first 2. I grouped the second 2. Let's go ahead and do the yellow. So find the GCF. The GCF is going to be X squared. That's going to leave me with X minus 2. That's the yellow. Now, look to the blue. So look at the blue part. In the blue piece, I can take out a negative 9. That's going to leave me with X minus 2. Again, that's the blue piece. Just double check. I'm going to underline it green again. Double check that these parentheses match. See how they both have X minus 2? That means you did it correctly so far. So then I'm going to go ahead and take these GCF pieces, X squared minus 9, and I put them together as a factor. And then the part that matches, you write it down 1 time. Okay, normally, most of the time you would be done. However, there's a catch to this. This yellow part right here is a little bit of a catch because I could keep going. This part right here is difference of squares. So see how it has a binomial, it has a minus sign, 1 is a perfect square, and 9 is a perfect square. So in this problem, I could keep going. So I'm just going to set this up. So I'm going to, that green part, I'm going to factor that further. So I separate x squared into x and x. The square root of 9 is 3. One of them is positive, one of them is negative, and then the x minus 2 just drops down. So just always check for that because sometimes you can go maybe that one extra little step. Okay, let's do a few more. Problem C. 4 terms. I grouped the first 2. That's yellow. I grouped the second 2. That's blue. Let's do GCF of the yellow. I'm going to take out 4x squared. That's going to leave me with x plus 2. That's the yellow. Then do the blue. The blue part I could take out a positive 6. That would leave me with x plus 2 on the inside. Again, if you don't understand how to do the GCF, you need to go back to the GCF notes or maybe YouTube GCF or find more videos on GCF. Do the worksheets on greatest common factor because the greatest common factor is now embedded in all of these problems and you really have to be an expert at that. Okay, going back to the problem. So I split it up, my yellow and my blue. I took out my GCF. Again, just double check at this point that your parentheses match. So that has to match in order to keep going. So then I'm going to go ahead and write down my GCF pieces. Go ahead and write those down. And then the part that matches, x plus 2. Again, always be kind of on the lookout to see if you can do something extra. I do notice one thing that I could do here, this green part, just like the other one, I can go ahead and take out a GCF. So in this green part, and only that little green factor, I could take out a 2. If I take out a 2, that'll leave me with 2x squared plus 3, and then the x plus 2 on the end. That just takes it one step further that you factored it completely. All right, let's do the next one. Problem D. Chunk my first two, that's yellow. And my next two, that would be blue. Let's go ahead and focus on the yellow. I'm taking out a GCF, which would be x squared. That'll leave me with 3x minus 2. That's the yellow. And then focus on the blue. The blue part, I can take out a minus 3. That would leave me with 3x minus 2. And again, that's for the blue part. So look at the yellow and then look at the blue. Double check that the parentheses match. See how they're exactly the same? That means that you're on the right track. So now I'm going to go ahead and write down x squared minus 3. I combine those together. And then I drop down the 3x minus 2. I only write that one time, but I drop that down. Just glance at this, see if you can do anything more. At this point, you cannot, so there's my final answer. Okay, problem E. Let's go ahead and group the first two, that's yellow. And the next two, that's blue. Let's do GCF of the yellow. GCF of the yellow, I could take out a 5 and an x. So that's going to leave me with x plus 5 for the inside. That's the yellow part. And then I'm going to do the blue. For the blue, I'm going to take out a negative 2. That's going to leave me with x plus 5. Be careful with the signs. That'll leave me with x plus 5 for the inside. That's the blue part. And then before you get further into it, just double check that your parentheses match up. I underlined those green. Those do. They're perfect, x plus 5 and x plus 5. So then I'm going to go ahead and combine 5x minus 2 into a factor. I put them next to each other. And then I combine x plus 5. I'll just drop those down, really. And I only write it one time. And that is my factored form. I can't do anything further with that one, so that's why I finished. Okay, last one, factor by grouping. It has 4 terms. So I group the first two, and I group the second two. The first one, the yellow one, let's start there. I take out a GCF of x squared. That'll leave me with x minus 1. Again, that's the yellow part. And then I focus on the blue part. The blue part, I could take out a minus 9. That will leave me with x minus 1. Again, be careful with the signs, but that is my blue piece. Then, again, I keep saying this, but before you move on, double check that the parentheses match. They have to match. If they don't match, then you did it wrong so far, and you need to go back and fix your work. You need those pieces to match. So then go ahead and take those pieces in the front, x squared minus 9, combine them together, and then x minus 1 drops down. Double check to see if you could do anything further. I can. This green part is going to be difference of squares. It has a binomial. It has a minus sign. 1 is a perfect square and 9 is a perfect square. So let's go ahead and separate this off to finish. I separate x squared into x and x. The square root of 9 is 3, so each of those get a 3. One of them is positive, one of them is negative, and then do not forget about the x minus 1. That also needs to stay in your answer. Just drop that down, and there's your final answer, factored form. Make sure you're going onto Canvas looking to see what your assignment is. Make sure you're staying caught up on exit slips, discussion boards. Make sure you're emailing your teacher if you have more questions. We have done GCF, we have done difference of squares, we did factor by grouping, we did normal factoring by trial and error. There's a lot of stuff going on, and factoring usually is challenging for people. So I know I said this in the other video, but if you need more help, reach out to your teacher, or just simply go onto YouTube and type in factoring, and there's going to be tons more videos with a lot of other examples that might help you. Maybe you just need more exposure and you need more practice. So make sure you're using your resources so that you can get what you need so you understand.